Oh, again, I'm so sorry. It's hard when you've got fairy lights and mouse and
maybe we can actually, as I'm just watching the number, Joe, it's stayed around like 50, so maybe we could make a start. Yeah, up to you.
Okay. Ngalawa o mina galamban, kura duabali jawi, gare ngalawa o nga, galamban mangamai o nga ngarabanya, ngayama bagalamban punari. She is still there waiting, this country. Although they have obscured and concealed the land, she is still there, waiting beneath and dreaming we will listen. This country is still breathing, breathtaking. Moan mana bangawara banya, Wadaguru and Garabanya, Bayaba Banya, Naba Guani Banya, Buliman and Diri Banya. Every time we gather together to design, let's listen to the ancient stories. Let's learn to speak in language and acknowledge the ancestors, seeing the beauty of this spirit country. Bining Yadbi Jawi, Naba Galia Onya, Naba Ngabadi Onaba. To those pushed to the margins, we call you family. Kin, loving kin. That acknowledgement of country is something that Shannon and I wrote together for the Queering Architecture subsection of the Architecture Bulletin that came out in December last year. And I'm now going to ask you to do a welcome.
So, Video Galamban Gurad. Welcome to the sacred land, wherever you are. I acknowledge the ancestors and the elders of the places that you all are coming from tonight to be with us here. We are on land that's now known as Sydney. It's the unceded land of my ancestors and elders, who are the Darawala Eora people of the Sydney Basin. And as I acknowledge my family and our ancestors and elders, I also acknowledge that this land is also very strong and very vital in culture to other Aboriginal groups, including the Darug, the Gaimaregu, the Eora, the Gundungurra, and many other groups that belong to our kinship system here and are part of the cultural country landscape. So I would like to say Dijari Guru Guwanamia, which is to thank you all for remembering our ancestors by having this beautiful welcome here tonight. And also my welcome wish to you, one of our Darawal wishes for your respect and your attention this evening, is to wish you all Niyingi Bilimanendirata. May you always see the beauty of this earth. So thank you all. And without further ado, back over to Joe.
My name is Jo Patterson Kinniburgh, and together with Diana Espiritu, I'll be helping to facilitate tonight's session. We just wanted to start with a little explanation of what we mean by queering architecture. We've had a lot of people ask a lot of questions of this, and so we wanted to just frame the conversation before we move on. I love this image because the idea of licking architecture sounds somewhat queer, or at least somewhat unexpected, and definitely not the normative approach we have to experiencing architectural space. And even to share this image with you is strange within that context because it's an image of a child. But I also wanted to share with you a story of a friend who, I don't know if they're here tonight or not, but I won't out them by naming them, but who had the ambition in life to be the very first person to lick the Frank Gehry paper bag building in Sydney when it was getting towards completion. And so on a site visit, he managed to very convincingly lick the Frank Gehry building as a kind of fulfillment of a dream of some kind. And while it seems like an unusual thing to be talking about, there's something about that, like way of thinking about architecture is the things that we forget to think about experiencing. And this child is licking this building because it sits on a very saline site, and the salt soaks up through the building and it makes the surfaces salty. And so you can lick it and it's a very salty building. By queering, what we're talking about is really a contraction. It comes from the term queer reading. So we're not turning architecture queer, but rather what we're talking about is a queer reading of architecture. Maybe the panel will disagree with me later and we can discuss that. But this idea of a queer reading is fundamental to what we're talking about. It's like, what is it that we miss when we fail to think about a queer reading of architectural space? And so thinking about this principle of an alternate reading, I just wanted to use the example of Finding Nemo and then Finding Dory. There's this wonderful adventure that for children, the reading of that film is about a fun adventure about a child who gets lost and a parent who'll do anything to find them. There's a lot of excitement riding the East Australian current with Crush, I think his name is, the turtle. There's the fear of being lost and the peril, and then the resolution of that. And so this is an exciting adventure. And then as an adult, we read other layers into it. We understand Dory's neurodiversity, that, you know, Marlin has severe anxiety and depression, and that Nemo is always working to overcome his own physical limitations in terms of moving forwards when he swims. So there are other readings of that you get as an adult that children just miss in the enjoyment of the adventure. And then if you want to add another layer of reading to that, we can talk about a queer reading of it that looks at this this kinship group, this family that's brought together through love and through connection. It's an asexual relationship that Dory and Marlin form in the caring for the child. There's a whole series of layers to it that we can read and understand, and that are completely missed if you fail to think about a queer reading. So what we're thinking about is, what is a queer reading of architecture and design methodologies? What is it that we can bring to the work that we do in creating space, in imagining space, and in making space that we're currently overlooking, that would make for a world that is much safer, more inclusive, and I'd say more special. And as a very brief introduction to my own perspective on this, coming to it through reading The Undercommons. This is a book I've been slightly obsessed with for probably 5 or 6 years now, by Stefano Hani and Fred Moten, and the chapter in particular on fantasy in the hold, which is about the hold of the slave ship, and for me is about recontextualizing my own family's history of transatlantic shipping and enslavement, and how you can reinscribe agency, the agency that I know through my family's story, back into that experience. And so this is from Hani and Moten. To have been shipped is to have been moved by others, with others, skin against epidermalization, senses touching, thrown together, touching each other. We were denied all sentiment, family, nation, language, religion, place, home. Though forced to be touched, to sense in that space of now space, though refused sentiment, history and home, we feel for each other. And then to extrapolate on that, this quote from Natasha Omaseki Tinsley: queer, not in the sense of gay or same-sex loving identity waiting to be excavated from the ocean's floor, but as a praxis of resistance. Queer in the sense of marking disruption to the violence of normative order, and powerfully so. Connecting in ways that commodified flesh was never supposed to. Loving your own kind when your kind was supposed to cease to exist. Forging interpersonal connections that counteract imperial desires. And so I'll stop sharing now, but and hand over to Diana.
Great, thanks Shannon, thanks Joe. So I'm just going to introduce a few of the speakers, but first I did want to introduce Shannon Foster, and thank you for joining us to welcome country. So we welcome Oral Ra, registered traditional owner of Sydney, Shannon Foster, whose family has shared the land known as Sydney with the other Aboriginal people of the region since time began. Shannon is a Dharawal knowledge keeper, artist and interdisciplinary creative practitioner with over 20 years of experience in designing education programs and spaces in prominent Sydney institutions. Shannon's doctoral research with the Centre of Advancement of Indigenous Knowledges, UTS, addresses a large gap in site-specific Sydney-based Aboriginal knowledge as she documents the stories and knowledges of her family. She has expertise in cultural practices, history and ceremony, in ecological and botanical knowledges of local ecosystems, in Indigenous research methodologies and Aboriginal languages of the Greater Sydney region. Thanks, Shannon, for joining us. And I will just also introduce my co-host, Jo, because thank you for the acknowledgement of country that both Jo and Shannon have put together. So with a passion for design practices that counter colonizer counts of place, Jo Patterson Kinniburgh educates and practices in a way that is respectful of Indigenous histories, cultures, languages, and knowledges of country, Wenua. Her experience in architectural practice since 1991 in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and now Sydney, led her to embrace a negotiation between cultural protocols to find productive modes of Indigenous and non-Indigenous collaboration. She has been the Director of Education for Architecture, Landscape Architecture, and Interior Architecture at the School of Architecture of University of Technology, UTS, and has remained on faculty there since 2007. She is currently writing her PhD on the Sydney-specific Aboriginal spatial relations with country at the Centre of Advancement of Indigenous Knowledges, UTS, and a director at Bangawarra with Shannon. And then on to the three main speakers. Thank you so much for being here. So we have, I think speaking first will be Neff. With a background in architecture and construction, Neff is a client-side project manager delivering capital works projects for cultural institutions such as galleries, museums, performing arts companies. Neff is an irregular writer, researcher, and social commentator, including working as a research assistant for Equity and Diversity in Australian Architecture Profession, Women, Work and Leadership, 2011 to 2014, which was the research which established Parlour, so Parlour Architecture. Proudly out and queer since her teens, she is a former treasurer for the New South Wales Gay and Lesbian Rights Lobby, and she likes to think she's funnier than she is, which she is funny. And then we'll have Sean Coyle. So Dr. Sean Coyle is the head of design and arts management at Toi Whakari, New Zealand Drama School, and a Wellington-based scenographer and educator. In 2009, he was awarded Set Designer of the Year at Wellington Theatre Awards. His most recent publication is Cruising the Stage Wonderland, Scenographic Photography and the Queering of Space, which is part of Scene Journal's recently published Special Australian Scenography. Sean is a graduate of both Toi Whakari, New Zealand Drama School, and VCA Melbourne. Has a master's degree at Art and Design from AUT Auckland, and a PhD from the University of Tasmania, where he has also worked as a lecturer at the theatre faculty. Sean was the head of school at Pacific Institute of Performing Arts in Auckland for 12 years, from 2018 to 2020, and from 2018 to 2021, was a lecturer in scenography at Victoria University of Wellington. So welcome, Sean. Thanks for joining us. And then last we'll have Phoebe Adams. So Phoebe is a queer artist, designer, performer, and PhD candidate at the University of Tasmania. Phoebe's doctoral design work is triggered by frustration, raise, and the systematic gender biases within design disciplines. Phoebe uses drag king performance to manifest nuanced and important commentary for architecture, design, and making cultures. Phoebe's presence on this panel guarantees hilarity with thoughtful critique. And then it's always a bit weird introducing sort of myself with a bio, but I am currently working at Woods Bagot, specializing in, as of recently, I'd say, education spaces, and have also worked across a few community arts projects. I like to say that I'm active in trying to find authentic approaches to research, collaboration, and spatial understanding. I'm originally from Sydney's West, which I'm quite proud of, and I inspire to embrace equity through an intersectional lens for all people beyond binaries and stereotypes. And my honours project that explores identity, sexuality, and the body continues to form my practice today, which I guess is a bit of why I'm here. Oh. There you go. And now I think we can get a kickstart with Neff, if you're ready.
Excellent. I hopefully have successfully unmuted myself, so let me know if that's not been the case.
Very clear.
Fantastic. So I'm doing a reading of the piece that was published in the bulletin in December last year. Queer, as in who we police as an architect and who isn't an architect, and what capital A architecture as hard as we police gender norms, unceasingly, unconsciously, and reflexively. Queer as in the client wants gender neutral and inclusive toilets, but has to stick male and female labels on the doors to get sign off. Queer as in it's a men's store, even though the store and the financials and the clothes certainly don't give a fuck who wears them. Queer as in those gorgeous men who died in the AIDS epidemic and should be at their architectural peak. Queer as in my ex-girlfriend is a divorced man now. Queer as in, why is it called a master bedroom anyway? Why not mistress or mix or main or primary? Queer as in the kink playroom should have natural light, not be in a basement. Queer as in, I know where the police snipers are stationed at protests because of the death threats to speakers at gay marriage rallies. Queer as in we should protect cultural sites like Beats in the State Heritage Register. Queer as in I want memorials to victims of anti-gay violence and police apathy to use the words sanctioned murder instead of symbols of healing. Queer as in who I fuck is both none of your business and in your face. Queer as in the pink triangle was originally a Nazi symbol used in concentration camps. Queer as in everyone confessed to surveilling the university queer space before braving entry. Queer as found family, queer as chosen family, queer as my family. Queer as smiling when you aren't us, when you're going to meet a nice boy while standing next to your partner of over a decade. Queer as never correcting the mechanic who misgenders you every time you go in, partly because you know you're getting better service. Queer is wondering if you're going to be asked to leave a bathroom because someone thinks you're in the wrong one, again. Queer is being asked to pose with your colleagues as they post their yes vote when you're raging that your civic rights are subject to a vote at all. Queer is knowing your tax dollars are supporting chaplains in schools. Queer is explaining that a demi-boy who is androsexual isn't gay and then wondering that you've outed someone's gender identity. That's the end of the piece that I wanted to read and share with you today.
Thank you, Nev. It's such a, if anyone hasn't read the full article and, you know, also the piece, because so that's just a, I guess, small but very really powerful piece of the whole article. You should definitely read it. I think I've read it quite a few times, and I just feel like every time I read it, I just see something else, and I'm like, oh wait, yeah, no, that. And it is something that I go back to. I've gone back to.
It was really tough. It wasn't hard to write. It wasn't hard to write at all. It was tough to submit because that's not what you do in professional spaces. You know, the kind of talk, you know, I went through, you know, uni kind of in the early noughties. Identity theory was really big. Judith Butler was a big part. So ideas of performance and performing identities were around a lot when I was younger. And I think one of the things that comes up for me is that there's that tension between performing I am an architect as an identity and performing I am queer. You know, they're not necessarily aligned. And so it felt quite transgressive to kind of, you know, swear in a journal and to say quite personal things. Often we mediate our professional identities quite a lot. So I just kind of went, screwed up my eyes, hit the submit button, and sent it off into the world. So it's really exciting to hear that some people, you know, find it resonates with them, which is really nice.
It's really interesting the way you framed that, the identity of an architect that we.
You've managed to mute yourself there.
I don't know why this keeps remuting me.
Censoring.
I've tried. Hopefully this will work. Yeah, I love the way you talk about that identity as an architect and the things that we learn, or as a designer in any discipline, really, things that we learn and take on, that we're a good designer if, when we're in our early years, I think, of study, and somehow we have to perform that as much as we perform other aspects of ourselves, but that can be mutually exclusive at times, or it can be difficult to move between them. And it's not a new idea, but that we, you know, have to change who we are depending on our context. But one of the things I wonder when you read that, and when you read that, sorry, your consideration of space is so much richer and so much more powerful for bringing all of who you are to that conversation. And I think there's something in that. So I guess I'm interested in, are there any particular points in there, because we could talk about each one of those for 15 minutes each, because are there any particular ones that you'd like to bring out, or any particular ones that resonate, Phoebe, with you, or Sean with you, or Diana with you, that we could discuss?
Will you mute?
Thanks so much for sharing that, Neff. I'm desperately writing down the details. I really do want to read the whole article. It's fantastic. Could someone remind me where it was again, published?
It's on the architecture.com.au website. I want to try, I'm having technical difficulties, but if we can post it on the chat, that would be awesome, I think.
I mean, I really appreciate it. I love that. And it's that thing that Joe was talking about, queering and queer reading anyway, that basically, you know, everything is challenging the normative and the binary, and made me personally think and, you know, acknowledge this, you know, the personal, you know, like the master bedroom and stuff, and going, oh yeah, of course, and something that I just don't necessarily acknowledge. So yeah, great. I mean, I love work that makes me think and challenges my own shortcomings.
Well, I liked a bit about rage, because I really relate to that. When I was first researching rage, as opposed to anger, rage is like the death of 1,000 cuts. Rage is a cumulative thing over time. It's many things, whereas anger is at a specific thing. And my work is driven by that rage and sense of injustice that I feel. I feel like my blinkers are off and no one can see what I can see. And there's a frustration that leads to a rage of, why can't you see what I see? So I relate to that part of that work, which is very, very good. Thank you, Neff.
Oh, no problem. I'm definitely glad the rage came through.
What I really like, I mean, I feel like I there's some that I feel like I relate to, like especially the I think I can't find it, but there was a bathroom one that, like, you know, when people give second looks, like, are you meant to be here? In the bathroom. It depends what haircut I have, actually, and what size shirt I'm wearing. But I do like looking at it again. I like how, I mean, the first line is queer as when we police who is an architect and who isn't an architect, which is something that I guess, like, in architectural practice, everyone can relate to and be like, yes, that's correct. And it kind of, you know, takes you to the extreme of, you know, things that, yeah, you wouldn't think about, or, you know, quite serious topics, but it just fluctuates between, you know, the almost everyday mundane to that, I guess, like, let's say, queer extreme. Yeah, which I think is why, yeah, I've had a few conversations with people, but yeah, they seem to, this is just a really powerful piece, I think.
I'm really drawn to the idea of when you spoke about, you know, being the queer person present in, you know, the norm sort of, you know, space or out in the mainstream or whatever, and you're kind of like this, it's the absurdity of, you know, everyone's looking for this moment with this marginalized kind of idea, or to be inclusive, or to be centered, or to be, you know, embracing diversity, and you're standing there like a shag on a rock going, and hello, I'm here. And that really speaks to a part of me that is Indigenous and isn't recognized as that by, you know, just the mainstream kind of, you know, general public or whatever. And I just, that absurdity that they're actually talking about you, like, what did I hear? That history is being told. It's like, you know, hearing your own kind of obituary, you know, it's like a funeral and the person's still alive and you're talking at them and about them, but not to them. It's just utterly absurd. And you've really captured that beautifully in that work and in that writing. And that really sort of inspires me and connects me to you in that way. So I find that really interesting part of the story.
I have a question, if anyone, but also anyone, feel free to jump in. I guess, like, in terms of, it's kind of about language, and I guess so. Joe also mentioned that idea of, you know, being an architect, but also being queer, and then, you know, maybe potentially like code switching between the two, or, yeah, trying to be you. And with this performance, I guess you have a series of experiences that you have deemed as queer to you. I just wanted to like maybe know more about like when you were introduced to that language, like essentially, because, you know, when we have experiences, just like, you know, let's say like Nemo, for example, we just, you know, having an experience, we're just doing live. And then, you know, later on we're like, oh, hang on, that's, you know, X, Y, Z. So I don't know if you have, you can expand on that more.
I'm really sorry. I'm having some connection issues at my end. So.
Oh, good. Do you want me to repeat anything?
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's okay.
I'm sorry.
No, all good. I just wanted to know, I guess, like, when you essentially found, I guess, like that type of language to communicate, like queer as a, you know, language. Might be cutting out again. I think it's the rain.
Rain in the NBN cables. The worst in Sydney, and our crosses to Tasmania and New Zealand are fine, but
Perfect connection to Tasmania.
shall we, given Neff's connection issues and sick child issues, maybe shall we move on and invite our next performance presentation? Sean, would you like to share?
That'll be me.
It would.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you once again for having me. I am going to share a screen. I've got some images of some of my work here. Please bear with me. Okay, how's that? Is that working?
Perfect, Sean. Thanks.
Great, fantastic. So, Cruising Wonderland. Cruising Wonderland was a practice-based research project that I completed at the University of Tasmania as part of my PhD. that attempted to develop an interdisciplinary approach to operating between the performing, spatial, and visual arts. The practice-based creative component of this body of research consisted of a series of constructed photographs of dioramas inspired by significant sites of Australian and New Zealand homophobic violence. These images were then exhibited within a darkened, maze-like environment. The title, Cruising Wonderland, had multifaceted significance in relation to the project. Wonderland, in referencing obviously Lewis Carroll's 1865 novel, alludes to the curious land of wonder that Alice encounters when she journeys down the rabbit hole. This down the rabbit hole metaphor as an entering into the unknown is an apt one when pursuing a practice-based research journey where, like Alice, all manner of temptation, confusion, elation, and danger await around each bend. Since this project was concerned with finding a new spatial way of engaging spectator/audience with the presentation of photography, the inherent spatiality within the term Wonderland or Land of Wonder allowed for a new scenographic thinking to emerge. Of significance also to this project, which uses locations of homophobic violence as a means of exploring the concept of scenographic photography, is the Bondi, Sydney site of the failed colonial endeavour, Wonderland City, an open-air amusement park that existed from 1906 to 1911. During the mid-20th century, the surrounding locale of what was once Wonderland City became a well-known and frequented beat, a site for men cruising for sex. And throughout the 80s, this area hosted an epidemic of homophobic violence, with gangs of youths entertaining themselves through the blood sport of poofter bashing. And a number of men disappeared. Some were thrown from the surrounding cliffs to their deaths. By introducing the term cruising into the title of this research that I did, I'm firmly placing this research within a queer context. Like Alice, who while cruising through Wonderland is constantly being tempted and often succumbing to her desires despite the danger, this research encouraged the spectator to cruise my Wonderland. So within this research, I've linked the act of cruising with how a participant may move through exhibited scenographic space. And in both examples, the individual moves through space with an acute awareness of their surroundings, the proximity of other people, sound, smell, and how the self performs when being watched, and an awareness of potential hazards and danger. In taking the work off the walls and requiring the spectator to engage with the exhibited works in a more complex spatial and physical manner, the neutrality and cleanliness prescribed by the normative white gallery walls is challenged, and the audience are automatically displaced from their natural art viewer default settings. Within Wonderland, the nightmares of decay and mortality are welcome components. This physical shift in the viewing paradigm allows for the potential to see and experience things in a more visceral fashion when the work is theatricalized through the incorporation of scenographic tools. Scenography allows me to explore the relationships between viewing, witnessing, and experiencing. So within my career as a scenographer, I've tended to adhere to the more physical object-based model making as a means to convey the scenographic environment and performative space. And during the pre-production phase, I would photograph scale models and distribute to relevant people as visual spatial reference points. The recollection of this communicative step within my scenographic process, and with the magic of physical model making still very much inherent to my practice, a critical shift within my research occurred where my development of a photographic text to be performed advanced from focusing on the capturing of queer damage, violence, trauma, and shame through performance to the endowment of scenographic models to explore the same thematics. So in view of this shift in research focus and in consciously removing the performing actor from the constructed mise-en-scene, my research became more concerned with how a depicted site of historic trauma could be represented in ways that allowed for a new effective way of experiencing the photograph that differs to the relationship the spectator may have with the documentary image of sight. So ultimately, this research looks to enhance and integrate and redefine the relationships between photography and sonography, whilst establishing a research and documented model for creating reparative strategies for exploring queer narratives of trauma. Jose Munoz asserted that queer has not yet arrived. His vision was one of collective transformation, a utopian ideal for the queer community. And my wish is to seek and explore this transformative vision through the constructed, staged, and performative worlds created by the medium of scenographic photography and housed within my wonderland. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Wow. It's always amazing to see you present your work, Sean. I mean, it's been a few years, and so just seeing the evolution of the thinking, it's so powerful, and I really appreciate sharing that with us. I've never looked at a presentation of your work before thinking about its application to architectural design processes and architectural methodologies, but actually it's quite amazing how aligned they really are. And I guess that comes from the fact that you're a designer on all those kind of scales, aren't you? I mean, you're thinking in those same kinds of ways. They're the same.
Yeah. I mean, architecture is key to all the work that I've done here, and the image that I have up now is the most recent work that I've done, which is sort of my first time going interior within looking at a sort of site of queer significance and queer history.
That's amazing.
So talented at creating the scene. Like I feel like I'm in it and a part of it in the same ways as when you look through the viewfinder. You feel like, I love the relationships that you talk about between the viewer and the creator, and that they're just as important as each other, that you're very generous to the viewer, like you're not sort of holding anything back there. And I love that. I think it speaks to, storytelling and all of those things, that when you're really looking holistically at them, it's more than just about the creator wanting to say something, but it's about who is receiving it and how are they receiving it, who's the viewer, who's the listener. And that's what I really love about this work, is that, and using the dark sort of surface and the ways in which you're interrogating the white bare walls of a museum or a gallery is like,
yeah,
I find that really strong, super powerful. It just creates this beautiful, like, cinematic kind of feeling that you're in it, you're of it, you're a part of it. Yeah,
I think that and I do think that that's sort of key to the work and what I was trying to explore, and a big part of that was people being able to be a part of it and be in it. So taking the work of them in a sort of dark and maze environment on really highly reflected surfaces, so people would see their image within the images themselves, and on the back of all this work was suspended and spotlit were mirrors on the back, so people would pass through and you'd catch a reflection of, could be yourself or could be someone else, because it was so dark you didn't quite know, and there was that sort of uncertainty, and that being in that environment created this sense of connecting with work in a very different way to how people normally do within a gallery space.
I think that's really successful in what you've done. I think I'd love to be in a gallery, and one day we'll get to travel.
One day.
What do you think when you speak about attending to the miniature and that the world stops, it feels like in the stop in your work, it holds everything. And I guess
Yeah.
in a design process, what's the benefit of the world stopping? What is it that you're catching there?
I don't know. I think that it's the interesting thing. I think you're talking about there, Joe, is this idea that the miniature itself is, we have such a visceral connection to miniature, and it comes from childhood. If you see, so much of what we play with is miniature versions of things when we're children, and people have a fascination they just still do with things that are made small, made miniature, in the same way they do with things that are made excessively large. But so this way that people have this natural connection to things that have been made small, like the diorama, and presenting it in a very still way, and this sort of environment that I did allow for this, or well, I was really aiming to be able to give people an opportunity to reflect without being specific about specific people that had where these sites of trauma existed, but just to know that they were significant sites of trauma that are somehow connected through a body of work that is placed together without being specific about the names of people affected. It's sort of that thing of being able to pay homage through that, and through that stillness, and through that acknowledgement. And to Susan Best in Reparative Aesthetics talks a lot about this idea of being able to move away from shame as a way, because in experiencing shame when it comes to some of our tragic past does not really allow us the opportunity for any sort of reparation, or to begin to heal. And so, in a way, that was a part of my purpose for doing this, and to experiment with this as part of my research was really key.
Dawn, do you think that scale can be a sort of strategy for queering an object?
Yeah.
One of the ways that we might do that, and if so, do you think that your miniatures create that sort of intimate space, and the dark is kind of like the back room at the Mardi Gras party or something? It's got that adventure feeling, but it's also a bit scary too.
Yeah.
But how did you use scale to get that sort of feeling of the beat, or the experience of being in the Wonderland?
Yeah, well, I think it's that whole thing of, the idea of the Wonderland, or the cruise club, or the back room, or the beat, or, it's all of that stuff. And it is really the sort of spatiality of it, I think, is about how it's set up, is that people within a space, it had a sound design, within there. It was very dark, like you couldn't see in front of you. These images were spotlight, and they already exist in darkness. So it was like a constellation that existed in there. And so people move suddenly very different, and they are aware of if there is anyone around. They're conscious, they are a bit nervous. And it's that thing of, in terms of, I guess, of the queer, that there's people that speak that language, that are familiar with moving in that environment, and then there's people that really aren't, and are unfamiliar with that, which I think is really interesting.
For me, listening to you speak is really interesting, because so many movement words come up, that there's cruising, beat, moving, and then you're kind of coming down in the scale and the stillness as well. But to me, it's almost kind of like, I think it's Ron Muick's work, like it's almost that the uncanny in the playing with the scale, and that kind of sort of slightly queer. It's a queer perspective. It's not what you're expecting. It's a little bit different. I really like that. But I was also interested, you kind of talked about the trauma, and I just wondered if it was a chronological presentation that you'd done, and where you saw that going, if queer has not yet arrived.
No, it wasn't chronological. I did look at a period of time in Australia and New Zealand in terms of my research, and you know, and our awful history of homophobic violence in both countries. I don't know. I mean, that was Jose Munoz. You know, this idea of the the queer, the utopic queer future. But I don't know. I'm sort of, in terms of this body of work, I sort of see I see it within Wonderland. I see this Wonderland as just now my ongoing work practice, that, you know, my creative practice, and this being things that are added to, taken away from other people coming into the Wonderland. And, you know, and I guess looking at it as a queer practice, you know, a non-normative practice, and, you know, and that it doesn't necessarily need to be the solo artist creating work as well, you know, and that I'm sort of really inspired by a number of young arts collectives that have sort of queer arts collectives that have just, you know, that are just doing a really wide variety of practice at the moment. In particular, FAFSWAG, New Zealand company collective, who are just amazingly inspiring young queer artists that are just working in such diverse areas. And people come, they stay for a while, they do other things, they try something new within this, and the work is amazing and inspiring. And that's sort of the queer future that I see within sort of creative practice. It's collaborative, it's collective based, it's also individual when it needs to be, it's political, it's you know, looking at our history, but it's also looking at our futures.
You spoke a lot about, Sean, I think in your practice it's very performative, and in a way temporal as well. I mean, the whole, you know, with Alice going into Wonderland, she kind of eventually just has to pop out and go back to normal. I guess, yeah, my question is, and you know, and you say it's like this ongoing work where, you know, people become part of the work, they're letting you expand this work, and it's quite continuous, I guess. And this is a pretty open question, but how do you think, like, if someone were to say, you know, are you able to create a fixed Wonderland? Like, would that be possible? What would that look like? Would it, you know, over time sort of lose its queerness, or maybe just expand on, I don't know, maybe permanent and the role of temporality, if it is, you know, in integral to queering architecture or spaces?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it could, but I mean, I think it would need to change. I think it would need to adapt. It would need to change. I mean, I certainly don't see my Wonderland as being something that can be fixed. I see it more as a sort of conceptual space than an actual physical space anyway. But you know, yeah, I'm not sure. That's a tricky question. Yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry.
No, sorry. No, I mean, it's interesting because it's.
I mean, I come from a, you know, performance design background, and, you know, I'm so used to just making things for a season or for you know, a show or for something, you know, and it's sort of, to think of things as being permanent sort of terrifies me because of that.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if it's kind of architects and, let's say, spatial designers that actually need to shift, you know, maybe towards, yeah, performance and, you know, things that are adaptive and, you know, always changing, relies on people and community.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, and yeah, quite possibly. I'm not sure. It's interesting looking at it like that.
It's amazing, and I think there's something of, you know, you placing yourself in that work in a very vulnerable way that also speaks to the way that Neff was speaking about the kind of personal experiences of space and architecture and culture and society. And I have a feeling that there may be more of that theme. Maybe this is something we can come back to, but I wonder whether Phoebe might like to share something with us, and then maybe we'll come back to at the end the kind of the shared nature of the powerful core of the work that you're all presenting. Yeah. Are you good to go, Phoebe?
G'day and welcome to Manny LeBeard Furniture Design. Furniture from the little beard-shaped island at the bottom of the world. This is a Danish cabinet by furniture designer Manny LeBeard. Functional, minimal, simple, neutral and modern, Manny's Danish cabinet wouldn't look out of place amongst other Scandinavian-inspired Australian furniture design. At a glance, the cabinet is a simple mid-century modernist plywood buffet cabinet. Raised proudly from the ply sliding door are a dozen diamond-shaped, uniformly spaced plywood Danish pastries. The slightly labial-shaped, layered and laminated pastries disrupt an otherwise hypermasculine scene as they hint at some form of gender fuckery. There is something strange about this Danish cabinet. Its legs are a little too big, the scale not quite right. It's a little too tall and deep, almost cartoonish in dimension. Instead of turned or hand-shaped solid timber, the legs can be more accurately described as flat ply silhouettes, shallow facsimiles of authentic Danish cabinet legs. The cabinet carcass does not boast the elegant traditional joinery of the craftsman. Instead, it has CNC routed finger joints, spaced to resemble dovetail joints. Even the clear sliding door, which may appear to be glass, is plastic. Manny, too, is familiar yet strange. His proportions aren't quite right. He's a bit short, his hands and feet are a bit small, his face a bit soft, and his body round in the wrong places. None of these things are very noticeable at first, as the audience is drawn to his magnificent beard. Manny's beard is made by Eva Nilsson from the hair of 3 Tasmanian women. Ironically, Manny's beard is the only genuinely handcrafted object in view. Like the cabinet, Manny LeBeard is also an impersonator, an imposter, and his beard is secretly female.
This Queering Furniture PhD research project exploits the intersections between drag performance, theories of gender performativity, and critical furniture design to question and critique social and cultural norms. It does this through the creation of queer-designed objects and queer performative gestures and interventions that reveal the production and reinforcement of binary gendered culture. Judith Butler identified drag performance as a gender enactment that challenges, subverts, deconstructs, and destabilises existing gender norms. Butler said, "In imitating gender, drag implicitly reveals the imitative structure of gender itself. Queering furniture applies strategies or modes of masculine drag performance, kinging, as a critical design strategy." Jack Halberstam, in their book Female Masculinity, identified 3 main modes of masculine drag performance. The first being understatement, appearing down, the second hyperbole, exaggerated statements and claims, and the third mode, shared by drag kings and queens and in-betweens, is layering, the permeable boundaries between pretending and being. Halberstam's modes of kinging are applied to Manny LeBeard and the objects said to be created by Manny. Manny LeBeard and his designed and made objects serve as a performative focal point for critical cultural and political conversations about cultural spaces, who inhabits them and who is missing. So who or what is Manny LeBeard? Manny is a manifestation of a mediocre white heteronormative male designer maker, lauded as a heroic genius. Manny is a manifestation of my frustration, rage with heteronormative, exclusionary stereotyping, systemic sexism, gendered language, and binary gender conditioning. Manny is a satirical critique of sexism, historical and contemporary, overt and casual, within furniture designer maker culture. Manny is the product of consumerist masculinity, masculinity with sales appeal. Manny performs the romanticised role of the craftsman. His credibility rests solely on his masculinity and ability to sand objects by hand. The word craftsman is sexist. Manny Lebeard's success is not merit-based. It's a foregone conclusion. Queering furniture employs both performance and performative objects as a response to local context, where issues of fetishisation, status, desire, performativity, and claims to authenticity will be examined. Queering furniture aims to demonstrate ways in which designed furniture objects can communicate queer political concerns. How gender performativity can be revealed through the design and the presentation of designed furniture objects, and that objects can operate performatively to intervene in and interrupt cultural expectations. Any interruption to a heteronormative interpretation of the object queers the object by making it strange and unfamiliar. The object, the subject, and the associated cultural expectations that come along with them become uncertain as the innateness of heteronormative binary culture is cast into doubt. Thanks so much for listening. And before I go, I would like to also pay respect to the traditional and original owners of the land here in Nipaluna, Hobart, the Muwinina people, to pay respect to those that have passed before us and to acknowledge today's Aboriginal community in Tasmania, who are the custodians of this land, which was never ceded. That's it. That's my presentation.
Wow, that was very special to have the elusive Manny Lebeard appear on our panel this evening, because I've noticed that Manny tends to only appear in photos and publications sanding things, and so to have that guest appearance, that was pretty special.
Oh, that wasn't Manny speaking. That was some other bloke talking about a bloke. Manny actually doesn't speak. He hasn't got much to say, really.
Okay.
Other people speak for him,
Right.
and build him up and push him along.
I love it. I love it.
My Instagram algorithm serves me a lot of woodworking you may like, because the algorithm knows, and you are like, that is just so on point, like graphically everything about that is just amazing. That was so great.
Thank you. I used to just be in a sea of rage until I let my drag practice enter my creative practice in terms of my visual art practice. And once I did that, everything just felt right.
Does Barry Both Ways still exist?
Oh God, yeah, he was in the Pride Parade here in Hobart just the other week. Yeah, Barry Both Ways is a good mate of mine. And he definitely talks a lot. Yeah. Very different creature to Manny Lebeard. I'd say that Barry Both Ways is an alter ego, whereas Manny Lebeard is just a jerk. That's really funny. I had that. I had the Danish cabinet at the university with the pictures up. Now, Hobart's pretty small. People at the time knew who I was at the university, but it was actually astounding how many people didn't realise that was me. And the funny thing was, when they did, they come up to me and they said, for days I've been looking at that jerk going, what a he's really full of himself, isn't he? And then I went, oh, that's Phoebe. Not that it is, it's not me, but yeah. Yeah, so yeah, good fun.
Yeah, Zoe Coombs-Marr, who's a comedian, she did a really amazing show, Dave, which I think won some awards at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival and has subsequently toured with it. But similar thing, Dave is an absolute jerk. He's such a dick.
Yeah, the drag kings characters tend to fall into two groups. There's the jerk, and then there's the I want to still look hot for all the girls that are going to come up to me afterwards at the women's dance or whatever it is. So there's like a glamour drag kings, and then there's the I'm having a cathartic release of frustration with this character.
Yeah, it's a very true summary. Although some camp queens, I think, kind of camp kings, kind of cross back and forth.
Oh yeah, there's also sort of like in-betweens, I call them. We did a workshop at the last Artfully Queer exhibition here in Hobart, where we ran a really fun drag showcase, and it was amazing how many people related to the more in-betweens, which is interesting when you think about the Jack Halberstam's layering, and that the whole idea that drag does allow your different genders to peek out. It's never sort of like certain. There's always that, and that's what I'm relying on, that moment of aha, of hang on, that's not quite right. Oh, what are they trying to say? And then getting people to have a little think about how things are, and I guess unearthing the taken for granted. We kind of live in this sea of patriarchal sea, and it's really hard to realize sometimes that some things are actually really bad for us, and don't help us be equal and work together very well at all, because the power structure is just set up for some people to succeed quite often. And then when you say stuff like that, people get really crapped off with you. But that's my experience as a queer person. I mean, the women that do succeed in the furniture area usually, you know, they're not a non-binary type sort of soft butch like me. They're usually quite, they'd go well in a magazine, I guess. Yeah. But I'm being a bit cheeky. I mean, it is a little bit offensive and rude, but I am punching up, not down. So I'll just have to wear it.
But I think there's a shift that happens between the kind of the response to that kind of context of shame, or you take agency when you express your rage. And like I think it's something in a way I read in all three of your presentations today, is that there's something to say that deserves that rage is expressed, and that we don't pretend it's not there, but that we hold it and listen to it and think a lot about why. And so that, I think that's super powerful. I should have intelligent questions for you, but in a way I'm just feeling quite moved by the three presentations.
I guess I wanted to ask, it was kind of a similar question actually. I was asking Neff, and you feel free to jump in now, Neff, that you have connection. But I guess like in your work, and you know, I guess like being an industrial designer and having this, let's say, rage, so that pent up frustration over time. I guess like at what point did you think to essentially like queer and subverse furniture? Like was that did that come a bit later? And again, like maybe even like the language of queer, because it's I think something that I certainly sort of relate to in terms of you know, finding that language, but then sometimes that language doesn't, you know, sometimes it makes sense to me, sometimes I'm included in that language, sometimes I'm not. So yeah, when did you kind of did you come across it, or did you go and find that language? Or
are you asking me or Neff?
Oh, you, Phoebe, but
me. Oh, okay. I first came across queer when I was in my early 20s and went to queer collaborations, they used to call it, at the universities. If anyone, hands up, who knows queer collaborations? Yeah, so when I first came out, I went to a queer collaborations, but queer was kind of, it was a word that hadn't quite matured, and I think it's, as we know, it's constantly changing. That's the whole nature of it, hard to define, always moving. It can't be pinned down. But queer was kind of like just an inclusive term for LGBTQ mainly. No one even talked about I or P, but it's evolved. And at first I didn't even see myself as queer until the evolution, until other generations took up the mantle. And now I definitely can see myself as queer. I used to just think, oh yeah, I'm just a you know, non-gender conforming lesbian, but actually I'm probably just totally queer. like I don't present as society says I should. I don't feel female or male. In fact, I think I've kind of got the advantage of having the best of both. in my identity. And I certainly feel a lot more weirdly confident since I started drag king performances. There's something about inhabiting that persona and experiencing the privilege and the way people treat you that is actually it changes who you are. But yeah, queer is a term I'm much more comfortable with now than ever before, and I think it's great to be queer. Yes.
Yeah, similarly, shout out to queer collaborations. So I don't know, this was before voluntary student unionism, so I think it peaked at, queer collaborations when I went, was hosted in Melbourne, and was between like 400 and 500, 600, 700 people at the time, which was just queer university students from across the country came together and partied and talked about being queer for a week. I guess I don't remember finding that language. I do remember finding language that I didn't see myself in. Like, I didn't necessarily see myself as lesbian, didn't see myself as same-sex attracted. You can objectively describe me as both those things, but they didn't kind of resonate with me. Queer was where I was at. Queer was, yeah, that seems about right. It's got a little bit more flexibility. So that kind of open, I don't know what's going to happen in my life or where I'm going to end up identity-wise. Seems weird that some people do. But yeah, I don't remember finding that word. I do, my sister is a theatre academic, and she introduced me to something, theory that I probably wouldn't have come across otherwise. So queer theory, Judith Butler, started reading that when I was about 17. Didn't really do anything about what I thought it might be going on for a couple more years. But yeah, so I turned 18 and my New Year's resolution was to come out. So I kind of, had a slightly different trajectory. And I think, I look at some of my family members in the next generation down, and they're going to grow up, with 4 gay aunties and have a really different relationship to knowing what queer is and seeing that from a really different age and perspective. In my own family is, same thing, that, 2 mums. Oh yeah, I've got 2, but like whatever. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, I think, how that changes generationally. Don't know if I've totally answered your question there, though, Diana.
Yeah, I think so in part. I think it was also like, I guess like I wanted to follow up with what can we, because it seems like, everyone is from different disciplines. And I think when, especially when I sort of read about queer theory, it almost like transcends disciplines. Like, it's not sort of found like all, from all these like academics and the readings, they're all, transcendent across all these different disciplines. And I guess I just wanted to ask if there was any, I guess like maybe like advice or ways that people in, let's say, spatial practices can apply, your ideas of what queering means, essentially, because it is very fluid, the term queering and its meanings.
I guess for me, oh sorry.
Sorry, no, you go, Neff.
I was going to say, for me, I think one of the benefits of seeing queerly or reading queerly is I ask better questions. I ask better questions of myself and my assumptions, and I ask better questions about what things might be. And I think that makes me better as a designer, and in my current role as, kind of eliciting briefs from people who often have a really clear idea of what they want, and more importantly, what they don't want, and helping to, draw that out into spatial terms that architects and other people can respond to. I also think there's a good chance I would have been a bit more of a dickhead if I wasn't queer, because I'm really privileged. And it's, when I kind of started to run into things, not looking like the right kind of woman or stuff around that queer, that's kind of when I started to have to think and interrogate a lot of those systems. I'm like, well, if I think this is bullshit, what are those other kind of binaries that I've accepted? Are they maybe not so real as well? So that's, I think, probably on one part, one of the benefits. I don't know the best way to kind of bring that across and make it more accessible to spatial practitioners, but I think, something I've learned working with some First Nations collaborators is the idea of holding space and time, which I think is one of the things that you can start to assist doing in queer practice as well?
Yeah, I think that embracing failure, as Halberstam has taught us in the queer art of failure, is really a great thing to do. The fact that in being queer, we're failing at being straight and living that, life, but also, just with, within artistic practice, failing and, in normative practice, as a queer practice. Sorry, my internet is now unstable, so I'm going to stop talking.
We heard you though, Sean.
Yeah, we heard you. Oh, good.
Okay, great. I sort of froze. Yeah, so I just, it's a really interesting thing, I think, and I think we're in an interesting time as well when we think about queering and this whole risk taking that comes with being queer as well, in terms of artistic practice, in that we don't necessarily need to subscribe to the normative rules, that we can do things, we can be radical, we can invent new ways of being, we can invent new ways of doing, because we don't have that legacy.
And we naturally have new ways of seeing because of our experiences of feeling like an outsider. I think when you feel pushed to the margins and you don't feel Neff like you fit into something, you can see it a bit more clearer than if you've got your blinkers on. Maybe that's the thing that queer can add to architecture and spatial practice, is the ability to see things maybe as they are.
Or that they aren't.
Yeah, who's there and who's missing.
I like when you said, Phoebe, push to the margins, and that it's actually in that space where you're able to, potentially see or re-see or reread things.
Yes, throughout, you asked about my practice. I'm not an industrial designer. I'm sort of a hybrid artist / designer. I don't make things for people to use, really. I make things to make a point more than that. But yeah, that outsider thing, I've always felt like that through my practice. Going off to Design Tasmania, which is where they'd have the women's women designer colloquium and stuff, and it was just very upper middle class and swanky, and they'd have a dinner on and it would cost $150. I couldn't afford $150 for a dinner at this event. So there's class adds into that too, but class works for queer people too, because how you look might affect you, and how you are might affect your ability to earn and get a job. It certainly affected my ability for many years, but yeah, I've always felt like me and the women that were doing the same practice as me here in Tasmania were sort of not just passed over, whereas the boys up north in Launceston, and Sean probably saw all that, it was only ever boys until recently that used to graduate from there. They seemed to have a lovely arrangement with Design Tasmania, and there'd be a big show and there'd be people talking about them, and then it just felt really frustrating for all of us non-binary and female people trying to make our way in this industry where we weren't what people envisaged having in their, a piece of ours wasn't what people envisaged having in their lounge rooms. Yeah, it didn't have the status or the mask appeal, sex appeal that a nice bearded lumbersexual young man has.
The hand sanding.
That was just my experience as a queer. I mean, I can't prove that. There's hardly anything written about it. In any contemporary books about designer maker culture, there's been a recent one, I'm really sorry, I can't remember it, but it's specifically about designer makers practice through jewelry and everything else. It talks about, there's a little section about the people that have been excluded from design practice because of their class, because of how they identify, all those barriers that are set up that you keep knocking your head against. So I guess Manny too was a way of kind of shortcut. Well, if that's what you got to do to, that's how you be to succeed, well, let's give it a go. I really want to put a show on somewhere in Tassie and not say that it's me, just say it's Manny, and see what the reaction is one day, see if that can hit home a little better. I think the thing people need to take away is that you've got to think about including everybody in what you do, and don't make assumptions that everyone's the same.
That's
And that's
really
all.
powerful, really powerful, Phoebe. And I think, you know, the architecture profession has an issue with gender equity. And while we've been working very hard on equity for people of all genders within architecture, if you look at the membership of the institute, it tailors off for women over sort of the age of 40. It just starts to drop down, and you see that the directorships in most of the large practices are skewed in the same way as you're describing. And there are lots of reasons for that, but I think that, you know, if we want to do better, then it's important that we listen and we think about what are the things that are missing, and all the things we're talking about tonight, about being present as your whole self in the work that you do, of being able to ask questions, ask better questions, as Neff was talking about, embracing failure, and that idea that, you know, being willing to be open to doing things we haven't done before that might or might not work, that Sean was talking about, and also expressing rage and being willing to hold that, to hear that, and to think about what that might mean for how we can do things better. And it's really really powerful conversation that I've been really moved by tonight. Just want to thank you all so much for being here and being so present and being so willing to share really personal and beautiful work. Does anyone have anything they wanted to say to wrap up? I'm thinking, Diana, if you had anything further, or should we get people for a drink?
Just trying to think. No, I think that's yeah, I was actually going to ask if anyone has any like very short. The past week I've just been having a few conversations with just like colleagues at work, I guess, trying to, you know, what is queering architecture? What is, you know, queer theory? Like, you know, is it only for you know, queer people, LGBTQ, etc. And I think the anecdote actually that I always go to, it's actually, and I was really surprised, I didn't realize that recent work, Sean, was really to do with Alice in Wonderland and that whole narrative, because that is actually the anecdote that I go to as well. So I look at, I mean, less of a, so it doesn't relate to the beats in Sydney, but more of the fact that Alice, you know, found Wonderland because she was bored of, you know, everyday life. She wanted something else. And then, you know, she followed a rabbit into Wonderland. She had no idea what was happening in Wonderland. She was trying to figure out, you know, using her past lens, so her usual, normal, everyday lens, and she really just couldn't understand why her body was changing, etc. And it's only when she reshifted her lens, let go of everything that she knew about, you know, world, and then that's when she actually was able to embrace Wonderland. And then at the end, so I guess like the temporality of it is at the end, she has, I think from memory, she actually is able to stay there. She has that decision, but inevitably she actually has to go back to real world. And I think for me, that's an anecdote that I always go to when kind of like trying to explain, you know, perhaps what queering is, or that queer lens. It's just, you know, re-seeing things and yeah, just reevaluating things, and something that we're always trying to get, but we never quite get there. So if anyone has, I don't know, if anyone has any last sort of words or ending comments to make about the topic.
No, except for when you talk about Alice in Wonderland, it also and the queerness of it, it also brings to mind Wizard of Oz and Dorothy. and we've back when there were no queer movies, except for all the lesbians in the movies were like chainsaw massacreists and criminal men, homosexuals. We used to look to movies like The Wizard of Oz and books like Alice in Wonderland to have a little bit of a queer reading, to feel that, you know, the world was pretty strange, and experience life like Alice and like Dorothy, feeling strange in this weird land.
I think there's a lot to be said for that re-entry back into the world for Alice as something that she will now read differently. She now has a queer reading of that world that she can contribute to her kind of path through it and her place in it. I think that's special to me. That's great. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you, Neff. Thank you, Shannon. And thank you, Diana, for an amazing conversation tonight. I feel really
Thanks for having me.
lucky to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wish you good night.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to the Institute. A special mention to Peter Fry for helping us organise, and the rest of the GET committee as well. Oh, I think Peter has his hand up. Is that, maybe that's an accident.
I'm just saying thank you. It was a good session. Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.